Hi, and welcome to the Shamanic Womb Oracle podcast. Or if you're watching on YouTube, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Shannon. I am a shamanic practitioner and I specialize in womb shamanic healing and soul shamanic healing. And I use this podcast space to answer questions, to share stories, to give spiritual guidance and advice that I hope will be useful for you wherever you are in your spiritual journey. And today I want to talk about spiritual illusion and or spiritual delusion. So my last episode or post, I talked about spiritual, like outsourcing your power to spiritual signs. And I thought I was going to talk about spiritual illusion and delusion in that episode. And then I decided to actually make it its own episode. So if you are coming to this after listening to the first one, we are going to actually go into spiritual delusion and spiritual illusion today. So let me start with defining what I mean by spiritual illusion and spiritual delusion. And I am going to use those two words, illusion and delusion, probably interchangeably a lot. I do think there's a lot of interchange between these two states. So spiritual illusion, I like to talk about spiritual illusion by talking about Neptune for a moment, the planet Neptune. So in astrology, Neptune is a planet of illusions. It's also a planet of spirituality. We look at where Neptune is in the chart, where it's transiting in the chart, to kind of understand what someone's spiritual gifts might be, what spiritual activations they may be having. Neptune can absolutely have a deep connection into like our spiritual selves, our psychic selves, our spiritual abilities. And at the same time, Neptune as a planet is really like its energy is really unclear. It's very foggy. It is not straightforward. When Neptune is transiting parts of your chart, and it's hitting personal planets, that can signal a really unclear time. That can signal a time in your life when you're like, I don't understand what's happening. You know, all of my ideas are just like feel like they're behind a wall of clouds. I'm not quite sure who I am anymore. I'm not quite sure what this means anymore. Like those kinds of energies, those kinds of questioning can come forward when we are experiencing Neptune transits, because Neptune is not a clear planet. It is illusory. And spiritual illusion is basically when we are on a spiritual journey, when you're in a spiritual path, and you are caught in a place where, for whatever reason, your connection to spirit has a lot of illusions going on. One way that we can see this happening, we can like pinpoint that this is happening, is by looking at an astrology chart. That can definitely be a way you can look at your transits and be like, oh, Neptune's here in my chart. Okay, yeah, I probably am going through some illusions right now, right? But a spiritual illusion, our spiritual illusion experiences are experiences when everything feels, yeah, like it's kind of foggy. And we're trapped in that fog a little bit. Like I can't quite see a clear way out. That can happen when we are in times of illusion with our connection to spirit. So illusion is part of the journey, right? Sometimes things are going to be illusory. Sometimes we're not going to understand where we're going. The other aspect of illusion, maybe the you could say the deeper aspect of spiritual illusion, is when you get to spiritual delusion. And spiritual delusion, I see that like when I have seen this happen, this often happens. I'd say I can't say always, I can't say 100%. But what I have seen is this happens when the ego is super undiscovered. It's like ego is running rampant. And at the same time, you're also having a spiritual awakening and your ego is trying to make sense of it. And you're like trying to filter spirit through very human lenses, which doesn't work. Spirit is not human. Human is not spirit. We are overlapped, but we are not the same, right? And spiritual delusion happens. Spiritual delusion, a great example in the kind of pop culture of spirituality that's happened recently, as of the time that I'm recording this, is a very influential, well-known spiritual podcaster saying that the goddess Isis told him to impregnate 2 women. That is spiritual delusion. Like, that is like peak spiritual delusion example. That is like so clearly, like when you listen to, especially if you've listened to or watched this, that particular conversation, it's so clear that there's a huge amount of ego at play there, and unexamined, unhealed, undiscovered shadow that is really driving that ego forward. And then whether there was or was not a message from spirit, that message from spirit was very, very shadowed, very shrouded by ego, leading to delusion, because delusion tends to build on itself. It's like going through and having huge like spiritual experiences without doing the shadow work, without doing the grounding, bodied, and like embodiment discernment work to really understand what's happening, really get a clear understanding of what's going on without, you know, the veil of the ego trying to make sense of your experiences, right? And spiritual delusion just kind of keeps growing on itself. And in the last episode I did, I mentioned, you know, one thing to be aware of is like grandiosity coming through from your connection to spirit. When spirit's telling you to do these crazy, beautiful, grand things and say like, oh, you're so important, you're here to change the world, blah, blah, blah. You are God, you are, you know, you are the reincarnation of this person, and all these things. And it's like, these things that sound maybe really cool to your ego, but also feel a little like, oh my God, what, really? Like me? What about the other person over there? Like, I'm just this, you know, like it feels a little off if you actually take some time to think about it. That kind of spiritual superiority, those kind of superiority messages are coming, they may be coming from spirit, may not be coming from spirit of good and light, right? But they're also being filtered through ego and a lack of discernment and a lack of embodiment and a lack of groundedness. And they can compound on each other and lead to delusion. So this is something that I think is running rampant in spiritual spaces right now. I think it's running a little less rampant than maybe it was a few years ago, but it's still there. It's still there. And that's because there is a lack of embodiment. There still is. There's a huge movement. I've absolutely seen more and more of a movement towards embodiment and like grounding into the body and descending into the body and doing shadow work. And that's amazing. Like, definitely props to where props are due, right? Like, that is true. We are seeing more of that. And there is still a lot of ungrounded, illusory, or delusional spiritual energy out there. It's just filtering around, just circling around in the spiritual space. And I will say, I do think one of the places that comes from is sitting with too many different plant medicines without proper guidance, advice, without proper, true, deeply integral medicine carriers and holders leading the way, medicine people, shamans, as it were, leading the way for these medicine journeys. I have personally met quite a few people in my journey who, for example, have sat with ayahuasca tens of times, you know, 40, 50, 60, so on and so forth, sometimes even hundreds of times, either met or heard these stories. Unless you were training to become a medicine carrier, because from my understanding, and this is not my lineage, so I don't know the details super strongly, but unless you were training to truly like become, you've been called forward by the people to whom this medicine is indigenous, right? Like the Amazonian people with ayahuasca, and you are training to be a shaman of that, a medicine person of that medicine, there is absolutely no reason to sit with that medicine that many times. That's insane. That's insane. there's absolutely no way to integrate that kind of medicine usage. And the people who I have personally met who have done that much medicine have been the least integrated, least grounded, least safe people I have ever met in the spiritual spaces. I had a really memorable meeting with a woman who serves Bufo, which is called, it's 5-MeO-DMT, and it's called the God medicine, God particle. I have never sat with Bufo. I've never sat with ayahuasca either. But I had a really memorable evening listening to a woman who serves Bufo talk about Bufo and her journey and spirit and all the medicine she sat with. And I just sat there and I was like watching her energy body. I was like, there's no grounding here. And I was just like, I was like watching her ego swell. It was like ego, 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 little bit of spirit, ego, 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 little bit of spirit coming in, like trickling in. It was so disturbing. It was. And part of the group of people I was with, like half the group was like, oh my God, I want to sit with you and I'd love to receive Bufo from you. And I was just like, that this is the last person that I would trust to hold space for something as potent as a Bufo journey. Are you kidding me? That was just that's an interesting tidbit, but interesting side note. But medicine is definitely one of the reasons that we see this, because medicine has become really accessible, especially if you have the money and time for it. And when I'd say it's accessible to everybody, but it is, it's much more accessible than it's ever been. And there's a lot of untrained people or minimally trained people serving medicine, and people going and doing weekend ceremonies and then having no integration, having no embodiment. And when you're doing really deep medicine like that, you need integration, you need embodiment. You really do. So like I said, I have personally never sat with like ayahuasca or Bufo or the big, the really big intense psychedelics. I have sat with medicine, and I have absolutely gone through a phase a few years ago where I sat with medicine too often, but never to the extent of like, oh my God, the hundreds of times, or even tens of times sitting with medicine. But even just sitting with medicine a little bit too often led to some of my like most painful and important initiatory experiences in my spiritual journey, where the medicine like very quickly was like, nope, you need even more discernment if you're going to sit with me. You need even more respect. This needs to be a deep decision and calling. I will call you. And so now my relationship with medicine is like a couple times a year that I'm called to medicine to sit with. And I very occasionally use it because it is a ceremony. It is a ceremony. And it is deep, and it is something that you need time to understand and integrate. I have medicine ceremonies that I've done where the full extent of everything I learned in that ceremony might not hit me for a few months. That's why we need to be really careful if we are using external support to open our spiritual connection or open our spiritual channel. So that's one pathway into spiritual illusion and delusion. Another pathway is awakening, going through being called into a spiritual journey and wanting to come into a spiritual awakening, and either not having a teacher as you're doing so, or having a teacher who's ungrounded and not really deep in their integrity as you're doing so, who's not teaching you how to get in their body because they're not really in their body, who's not teaching you how to discern because they're not discerning. That can absolutely lead to some illusion happening in your connection to spirit, where you're like, ooh, I don't know what to do with all this information, or I don't know, like, I don't understand what this means. Or it's even delusion, where it's like, oh my God, I'm all these things that spirit's telling me, all these reincarnations, blah, 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 and I can't live a normal life anymore. Like I'm too important to live a normal human life. So those are places that we can see illusion and delusion showing up. And this is why I actually am such a huge proponent of finding a teacher, finding a guide when you are really serious about deepening with spirit. So one of my own stories where, because I've experienced these, I've definitely gone through phases of spiritual illusion and delusion, especially at the beginning of my journey. So one of my stories is close to the beginning of my journey when I had a series of really intense awakening experiences. I had connections as a child, and some of them I definitely they turned off over time. And then I went through my Lyme disease journey, and I had my spontaneous remission from Lyme that happened in 30 minutes. And that was that was such a paradigm shifting moment for me, and opened me back up to like truly starting to want to connect back into some of my gifts. And then when I went out of remission a few years later, the one time I went out of remission in my journey, and I went, okay, well, I've healed myself before. Like I've had this, like spirit has healed me before, connection to spirit, connection to soul has healed me before. So I know I can do this again. I see that this is a gift to teach me how to heal again, because there's something here. Like I felt the call of like, I know I want to share healing with the world. I'm not totally sure how yet. And then I went out of remission, and I was like, oh, okay, this is my training ground. So I went through several like crazy awakening experiences in that time, where my channel really fully came online. I started talking to, like, receiving messages from my ancestors, receiving messages from spirit guides, receiving messages from star beings. And then within a few months of that, I also was in a meditation brought into the 23rd dimensional Akashic field, as it was explained to me at that time. And I had been reading other people's like books and stuff about the Akashic records, and none of it resonated. I read these books, and I was like, I tried to open the records in the way that was written in these books, and I was like, no, this is wrong. Like this is, or this is not pure. And I do think this is an issue with the Akashic field. A lot of people who channel the Akashic field, just in general, I'm not sure are channeling pure energy. I've only had a few people read my records, and this has been, years ago, because I don't trust anyone else at this point, honestly, because every time I've had someone else read my records, unless someone who I have trained to connect into the 23rd dimension and the Akashic fields there, it's felt off. It hasn't really felt like truth. It's felt distorted, and like there was some ego or some lack of discernment in there or whatever. That's a whole other discussion. But so in that time, I was brought into the 23rd dimension and told, here's a different Akashic space. Here's the ways where it's, different than what's out there. We want you to learn this, and here's how you can use this for healing. Here's how you can teach this to other people when you're ready to, and here's how you can, until you're ready to teach it. Here's just how you can use this to support other people. And so I went through this really deep connection, awakening with the Akashic field. And with the Akashic field is really just the soul, the fields of the soul, right? It's just the universal field of all that is in soul energy and soul history. I just like to use the Akashic field. I just like to call it the Akasha because I like I like the name, but really just understand it as the soul. The soul's history is held in the universal fields of consciousness, and that's what I was connecting into. And I did not have proper training. This was all self-taught up to this point. I guess I'd worked with one person for like a few weeks, but besides that, I was all self-taught at this point. And I did not understand. I was not nearly as grounded in my body then as I am now. This was before I found my shamanic teacher and went through an apprenticeship. And I was just in this constant state of channeling. My crown chakra was like wildly open. And I was just getting all of these crazy, beautiful messages. And a lot of those messages still have, like, when I go back to them, there are things in them that are really helpful. But the ways that I was interpreting them was still from my ego, because I hadn't done a lot of shadow work. I hadn't done a lot of ego work. And so I went through like this phase of figuring out, understanding some of my soul lineage and my connection into the stars, and identifying really strongly with it, to the point where I was definitely in some ego. It's definitely in some illusion around how to properly work with spirit, how to properly work with this information and not let it get to my ego and not let it get to my head. And then thankfully I had a very strong intuition. I need to find a teacher, and that's where my teacher came into my life, and very quickly into shamanic work, like, because shamanic work is so deeply about looking at your ego and doing some deep shadow work and understanding yourself, and understanding really how to work with spirit with deep discernment and embodiment. I was able to knock off the illusion or the delusions pretty quickly, to be able to come just down into the purity of even deeper into the purity of the teachings that I was receiving and being asked to share into the world. But I have definitely experienced illusion, where my ego was influencing how I was interpreting messages about myself, messages about my own journey. And I think that's actually really important. I think it's important to have experienced, to be able to spot it, especially working as a spiritual guide, or teacher like I do, because it's a really easy trap to fall down. It's a really easy path to follow. And it's not for our highest good, you know? So that's why I'm such a huge proponent of having a teacher at some point in your journey. I will say, to me, honestly, when I come across somebody who is teaching something, spirit teaching on some level, and they say that they're completely self-taught and they've never had a teacher, that's an immediate no for me. I'm like, okay, that's, you do you, but like, I will never let you into my field. Like, we're not going to connect, because obviously I am self-taught in many senses. There are a lot of things that I do that, like the Akasha records, that's absolutely self-taught, that was self-channeled. But the work that I do in the records, now 6 years later from that time, is so much deeper and so much more embodied and grounded and supportive, because I found a teacher, and because I learned how to work with my ego and my shadows, so that when I am connecting in, I'm much clearer, and much more grounded than I was when I was first teaching myself. And yeah, I have seen the effects of being self-taught as well. Like, without, like, I had one experience with somebody who was very, like, completely self-taught, and really showed me another deep and kind of dark and nasty layer of spiritual delusion, from the way that they worked and the way that they shared messages that they got in from spirit without any discernment about who they were talking to or what they were doing or any kind of grounding or anything. And it turned into something that was very damaging, for me. And it's a story that I don't need to go into details on, but it was something that could have become, it was really damaging, to my just trust. That's really what it was. That's really the best word. It was really damaging to my trust, to see that and experience that, and also see the lack of accountability, from that person. And so my point being, I've seen a lot of this. I have, seen people in spiritual delusion. I've seen people deep in ego with zero discernment or very little discernment, not embodied. I have experienced delusion myself. And it's so important to have someone to bounce off of, to have a guide or a teacher. It doesn't have to be forever. You don't have to like have a teacher who's walking with you, your whole life. But for a while, especially if you are like deeply called to spirit, and you are being called forward onto a spiritual path, and especially if you want to share your spiritual work or modalities with others, having teachers is so important. Having people to hold you accountable, having people to, as you continue to grow, to keep reminding you and like reflecting back to you where you are in alignment and integrity and where you might be slipping over into some ego again, because we're human. It's not like we're perfect. It's not like once we understand how to be in alignment or in discernment, that our ego might not creep back in at a different point or time, that we need some reflection of like, hey, come back to your integrity. Ego's slipping a little bit, listen, discern, come back into grounding, come back into body. Yeah, it's another reason that I don't super recommend like finding a bunch of tarot messages or readings or channeled messages on like YouTube or TikTok. I think those are the two platforms I see this the most often. Don't really listen to those things because you don't know what that person, and you don't know what that person is connected to. You don't know what they're reading for. You don't know what their energy is like. You are letting something or someone into your field when you listen to those things and you like take those messages. And yeah, you want to be careful. You want to be careful. There's a lot of untrained, unchecked, undiscerning spiritual ego out there. And that spiritual ego leads to spiritual illusion and spiritual delusion. And it might be fun for a while, but it's not going to lead you where you want to be. It's not going to actually like lead you to the true path of integrity, really, in the long run. It's just not. So be aware of it. Just be aware. Be aware as you move through the journey. Yeah. Just looking at my little list of things here I wanted to bring forward into this. I guess the last thing I'd say just to be aware of is people who are channeling. Not in all cases. I do some channeling sometimes. There are people who I respect deeply who do channeling work, but just be aware of it. Be aware of it. I don't accept channeled messages from people who I don't know and know their groundedness and their how big their ego is, how much ego work they've done. I don't accept channeled messages from people who I don't really feel. It's like, it's very much a feeling as well. It's like, if I don't feel completely safe in their energy, a complete sense of like, yeah, this is a person who's deep in discernment and integrity, I don't accept messages from them. Another like why I don't recommend really listening to channel messages on like YouTube or TikTok, because it's just discernment. It's just I don't know what you're connecting to, and I don't want to. There are bad or low energy spirits out there. Entities are real. Negative energy is real. This is not me saying ignore all of that. I am the furthest thing from a love and light enthusiast. Those things are real. Don't ignore them. And so that's why it's like, don't ignore body feelings. Don't ignore intuition about people that you might be accepting spiritual guidance from. Because there's a lot of ego out there. There's a lot of, it's really sad to say, but I really would say there's so much ego. There's so much like personal greed out there in the spiritual space. And that's where a lot of the people who say, oh, I'm doing spiritual work, and you can kind of feel like, you really want to serve, or is this your ego that really wants to feel important? And you can feel that, or at least I can feel that. And that's where you can see also some of that illusion and or delusion going on, because people can say, you can definitely have people who say, oh, I want to serve, I'm so called to the spiritual mission, and they are delusion themselves about what their actual what their actual drive is. So just be aware. Really, if you take anything from this, I would just want it to be aware, please. Be aware of what you're listening to. Be aware of who you're listening to. Be aware of your own connection to spirit. Be aware of the messages that you get. Be aware of your own ego. If you do not, if you have not done shadow work or ego work, it's probably time, especially if you want to connect deeper into spirit and really be able to have a discerning, loving relationship with spirit. And if that is you, if you wanted to connect deeper, I do have a shamanic apprenticeship that is starting this summer. It is a 12-month deep dive. And we do a journey with the shamanic, like ancestral medicine, like soul retrieval and journeying. And we work deeply with the womb, called the Shamanic Womb Alchemy Apprenticeship. And it is a powerful, powerful initiation and journey into your medicine and into your discernment and into your rightful connection to spirit. So if you want to join me, I'll have the link to learn more about the apprenticeship. And then there is a short application to do a discovery call that you can fill out and we can chat. All right. Above all, be discerning. Work on your discernment. Work on your shadow. When we haven't worked with our shadow, when we haven't worked with our discernment, our messages, whatever messages we receive or getting or understanding from a spiritual connection, they are going to be filtered through your pain, through your fears, through your limiting beliefs. That's why shadow work and ego work is so important, to really be clear and open when talking about connecting to spirit. So I hope this has been helpful. Please let me know any thoughts you have when you listen or watch. And just be aware out there. Be aware out there. Listen to your body, listen to your gut. Don't make decisions about spiritual people to work with, or like mentors or teachers to learn from your head. Make it from your body, make it from your gut, your womb, your root, your heart, like lower chakra energy, like make it from your body. Your body should be a yes. Your body should be a yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you as always for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.